Hello guys, and welcome to a new video today by me, Vulcan. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at the latest gameplay that was shown of Broken Arrow. Broken Arrow is a game I have been anticipating for a long time. Very excited to see this gameplay finally. A trailer actually released a few months ago showing off some of the shiny units, but didn't really give away much detail about the game itself, so I didn't cover it at the time. But today is a chance for me to give my thoughts and opinions on the game itself and what we've been shown so far. For those of you unfamiliar with Broken Arrow, it is a modern warfare strategy game made by some of the top players of Wargame Red Dragon, as well as ex-Eugen Systems developers. The project is their take on the genre and is looking to be a direct competitor, or modern update I suppose, of the Wargame series. Please be aware that the footage you are seeing in the background is part of an early build of the game, and it's likely that a lot is subject to change. But with that in mind, let's talk about what we can see. So in front of us is what seems to be a demonstration of a simple capture the flag scenario. The capture points are of course the red circles, and it appears the player is attempting to clear these of enemy troops in order to capture them. By what is shown, it seems as though any unit can capture a point by being in it. It's hard to determine whether or not there's a weighting system, like depending on whether or not one side has more than the other, or if all enemies need to be destroyed in an area before it can be captured, so that'd be interesting to know. But whilst this is going on, some of the players' units do get ambushed by the enemy in forest cover. However, it seems that the units on the move do actually deal with it quite well. Of course, they're probably being stabilizers on most of these modern units. You can see the blue bar for these units does represent health, and there's a white bar that represents reload time of the main weapon. You can see that some of the units do start to sort of get hidden again after firing, so there's obviously some sort of stealth system involved as well. And most of the units, it seems like, are being cleaned out by artillery. I'm not really seeing the orders for the artillery, but the player might have them on some sort of group order in order to give like indirect fire support orders to his artillery. And that's obviously going to be coming in, from quite far away in order to help out. But it does seem quite lethal when that rocket artillery lands. It does seem to do a lot of damage. And I think most of the engagements, except from potentially the infantry engagements that we've seen, do look pretty lethal, with each unit only taking like 1 or 2 shots, maybe 3 at most, before they actually go down. I think this is obviously going to depend a lot on the armour of particular units. Before the player captured the first point, we saw the armoured cars being taken out by autocannons pretty easily, but obviously a tank would probably deal with the autocannons a lot easier. I do really like the look of the ranged engagements, and although it's hard to determine without unit statistics if something is engaging at max range, most of it seems somewhat realistic. Some of the sound effects definitely hit the mark though, and the overall sound of battle seems about right, but individual scenes zoomed in do show some flaws for sure, especially with like repetitive sound effects. But I'm sure that's something that can obviously be worked on as they continue development. One thing in particular is of course the acknowledgements, but yeah, I'm sure they're still being worked on. We briefly get to see the rockets that keep firing into the map, and it shows just really the grand scale of the map as a whole. There are a few moments where the map gets zoomed out quite a bit, and if that's the sort of scale of map they're going for in basically most maps, single player or multiplayer, then that's going to be absolutely spectacular and give you a lot of tactical opportunities. This scene of the Abrams actually appears to be an example of the eye candy in the game, or at least part of the map that has more detail than in some other areas, for example. It has been confirmed by the developers that the map's creation and detailing is something that's still being worked on, as they wanted to make sure that the core mechanics were obviously working first. This means I expect in future we'll see much better maps and environmental graphics, which was something that I've been worried about since the first trailer, where I did point out a few flaws on my stream. I do see issues with draw distance, which hopefully gets fixed, where the trees are loaded but the terrain isn't in the background. Moving on though, we do get to see our first heli rush, or tactical outplay, which seems to take part near a reinforcement point, maybe with that blue arrow on the ground. I think the HGMs seem a bit hard to follow from these helicopters. The units seem to blow up without much indication of incoming projectiles. That's definitely something that I think could be improved. Clarity is very important in games such as this, where split-second decisions can really save a unit. Throughout, we do get to see the unit menu on the left with the different categories. In the top left you have your points to spend, and then income underneath, which seems to be added continuously over time to your total pool. As this clip continues though, we get to see an idea of unit speeds, of which on flat ground they seem quite reasonable, but as they reach the rough terrain it appears it doesn't really change much, which kind of breaks the immersion a little bit, especially with the cliffs looking very bumpy and steep. Dynamic speeds for terrain not only adds realism, but also something to think about during gameplay, so I'd kind of like to see that implemented if they could. As the clips continue, we do see the importance of infantry to clear buildings. For example, in this case, the wave of infantry pushing in front of the APCs, which drop them off. One thing I will say though, it is hard to see when an infantry unit is loaded in a vehicle at the moment. The unit icons seem quite hard to read too, with some quite ambiguous icons, like particularly the white ones. Took me a little while to identify what they actually were. Weapon effects do look cool overall though, as we get a good look at the artillery options with what looks like blue 4 mortars and some red 4 tube artillery. The enemy actually seems to use the tube artillery directly on the tanks, which indicates that they can aim quite quickly. Of course, unit statistics and how they work in terms of reload time and such is all subject to change. This is again a very early build, but it's interesting to see the heavy artillery used that way against heavy tanks. Another point I wanted to make is it does seem like for the most part during the gameplay that the player is engaging with large blobs of units and just sort of attack moving forwards, but I don't actually expect that in the game when it comes out that this will be the case, as when we were shown the deck building, which I'll probably cover separately, it seems like the units are much more limited. Although I think it's important to note that of course a lot of these scenarios are not representative of like a standard multiplayer game, for example. A lot of these scenarios are just created for show. That doesn't mean though that the player may have more access to units in single player missions where decks might actually be less important or potentially non-existent, especially if scenarios are more pre-scripted in a campaign setting. That will however depend what the campaign is structured like, whether it's through individual missions or if there's some sort of like sandbox meta campaign going on, but of course that's all speculation on my end because we haven't seen anything to do with that just yet. I did actually want to mention the UI a little bit more in general, and whilst the UI is something that developers often work on last, I actually really like the idea of the screen space being very clear. Having the option to hide orders, for example, once you learn the hotkeys would actually be really cool for freeing up screen space. You can probably expect the minimap will be added in future, so that will obviously occupy part of the screen. And you can already see the details that pop up at the bottom when selecting a unit or squad. I actually particularly like when infantry squads are selected, and you can see like specific soldiers that have died, and therefore the weapons that are now unavailable to the squad. I'm actually curious if they always die in the same order, or whether or not it's random. So if you maybe have your AT guy taken out of a squad early on, you no longer have the AT weapon available. So you can start kind of see what I'm talking about in this particular clip, where the infantry is trying to engage enemy infantry in buildings. Whenever the player clicks on the unit, it has that information that comes up at the bottom of the screen. You can also see that there is finite ammo in this game, which indicates the need for resupply, although no indication has been shown yet of how this will be done. Earlier in the gameplay you can see, like for example, the Apaches running out of Hydra missiles as well. So they are going to need resupply quite often if you're going to want to continue to use those weapon systems. I believe there was actually mention on the live stream where the gameplay reveal was shown that units could actually be taken back off the map for some sort of refund. So maybe that's how resupply will be done instead. I think overall that the gameplay we have seen looks very promising, and there is loads of potential here for a spectacular modern warfare strategy game. If the devs stick to their word and improve the map's environmental graphics with their already gorgeous units, they're going to create something truly beautiful. It's going to be hard to tell how the game truly plays until I can get my hands on it, but the mechanics I've seen so far seem good, and it's definitely set the tone for what we can expect in the future. But that's it from me. I'll be back with my thoughts on the deck building and editor in a future video, but in the meantime, thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.